Thank you just so much for having me. This is just an incredible group, and this subject of Beyond the Campus, obviously my talk is going to be very well suited to that subject. So much so that I feel compelled. I have to start out by giving a few clarifications and caveats. First, I am not anti-government or anti-science or anti-EPA. What we really need is these agencies are just not doing their jobs effectively enough, and we need to have a trustworthy EPA and Centers for Disease Control. The second thing is, I have to apologize because I realize I'm one of the last things between you and the presidential debate tonight. And I've realized that I'm going to have to talk for 5 hours here to make sure that you're not able to be subjected to that, because I'm about ethics. And I have the first slide. The first canon of civil engineering says that the engineer must hold paramount the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And in today's presentation, what I wanted to talk about a little bit is the issue of, okay, my advancer's not working. Oh, okay. All right, so what we'll do is I'll just use a hand motion because the slide's not advancing. And that is to address the issue of what price are you willing to pay to defend the public welfare. This is something I've dealt with over this journey of the last 13 years. And it started for me in Washington, D.C. There was this time period of high lead in water from 2000 to 2004. This is now listed as one of the world's greatest public health disasters and tragedies. And not only did the U.S. Congress say that, but it's also in Wikipedia, so if you don't trust the Congress. There were, we now know with the benefit of our research that there were 2,000 kids not born during this time period because of the abortion effects of lead, 200 late-term pregnancies, and thousands of young children in Washington, D.C. who were drinking this water had their blood lead elevated above CDC's levels of concern. Oh, point that way. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. And what makes this case study... I'm good. I'm right-handed. What makes this case study so interesting is that it's misconduct by the environmental policemen who we pay to protect us, who actually behave as environmental criminals with no profit motive whatsoever. And there's also no disputing that the harm that the lead does to children who drink the water. It's official U.S. government policy. There is no safe level of lead exposure. So when this news became public in Washington, D.C., in early 2004, people really just went berserk. Because what they'd realized was they had been told their water was safe to drink for 3 years when it was not. And at the first congressional hearing that I participated in, it was obvious that the agencies were in an awkward position.
Anything like this happen anyplace else in the country to this degree? I mean, is there any precedent for this?
There is a precedent, not to this degree, though, Congressman. I mean, there are instances.
So this is the worst case that's ever happened in the country in terms of the level and length of exposure to lead through the drinking water. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Staff is informing me that at Superfund sites, I mean, there are lead contamination problems.
Oh, hazardous material sites. Well,
right,
yeah.
Right. But in terms of a, yeah, well,
yeah.
no.
Okay. Awkward moment. Every now and then the truth comes out. And it was then I realized, this is truly an unprecedented situation because this problem was caused by changing the water source to a new disinfectant chemical. EPA was trying to make the water safer to drink. It backfired. The lead started falling off into the water. And D.C. is not a state. There's no primacy agency to blame. It's the EPA's responsibility to protect the water in D.C., and they failed. And so at this point, this went on for a couple months, and in late March, there were 6 congressional investigations because lead was high in the US Congress. There were even questions of President Bush at the White House press conference whether he was drinking too much lead in his tap water. And GAO announced that they were going to investigate. Here's the response of the city. Take a number. It's like a Soho bakery around here. At some point, there's so many people investigating us, they're going to be tripping over themselves. Well, we screw up. We're humans. That's what we do. There ought to be a Geico commercial that says that. But we can learn from our mistakes. And unfortunately, something was about to happen in Washington, D.C. that was to make sure we would never learn from this tragedy. What happened was the U.S. Centers for Disease Control came into town and wrote a falsified scientific report that said they looked at the blood lead of D.C.'s children, and I kid you not, they concluded that no one was hurt from this 3 years of unprecedented exposure to the best known human neurotoxin. Now, we now know with the benefit of hindsight that CDC falsified this report completely. On the day it came out, someone from the CDC asked the chief author of the report, Mary Jean Brown, hey, how's it going? How's your report being received? Here's what she put in writing. Today's the first day in over a month there wasn't a story on lead in water in the Washington Post. The first I haven't been interviewed by at least one news outlet. I guess that means it worked. It worked. How'd it work? They got themselves off. Any hope of holding these folks accountable for what they did in Washington, D.C. was gone. And then incredible things started to happen. It set in motion a sequence of events. First, in the aftermath of the report, I kid you not, the agency started to blame the public for what happened. In the Washington Post and Washington Times, just days after the CDC article came out, they said what happened in D.C., this lead crisis, so-called, it's much ado about nothing. EPA can claim there's no harm, no foul. And a pediatrician wrote into the Washington Post, said, you know, the amazing thing we learned from this experiment in D.C., this tragedy, kids can drink any amount of lead in water and it won't hurt them. A year goes by and the agencies who perpetrated this crime, you cannot make this stuff up, people, they started to give themselves awards, okay? EPA Region 3, who perpetrated this crime against DC's population for 3 years, gave themselves the gold medal, highest honor for distinguished public service. And then it gets worse because the lies from this falsified scientific report started to spread around the US, around the world. And when they found high lead in the schools of Seattle, a kindergarten classroom, hazardous waste levels of lead, a pediatrician wrote in and said parents should not be concerned about this because of the DC report showing that we don't have to worry about lead in drinking water. So it worked all right. It got the perpetrators off. It made sure we would learn nothing at all from this tragedy and that it was going to be repeated, because if you do not learn from your mistakes, you are doomed to repeat them. So we had a congressional hearing on this, bipartisan, as the result of 6 years of work that I put on this as a volunteer. The CDC was completely reamed for what they did, for this scientifically indefensible report causing this public health tragedy. And once again, you'd think, okay, you got caught. Admit your mistakes, learn from it. Give us hope that it won't be repeated again. No such luck. Here's what CDC's response was. They wrote an article to the Washington Post that said, you know, parents wouldn't miss a few IQ points lost in their children. Tom Sieg said that didn't go over well. He goes, you know, looking backward, it's clear this report could have been written a little better. And the current head of the CDC, Tom Frieden, wrapped up the CDC's investigation. Here was his conclusion. What we did wrong is in our urgency to rapidly assess the situation, we communicated results poorly. That's what they're guilty of. They don't know how to write. And so, what did we learn from this? One of the things I learned studying this is that there were 5 courageous scientists and engineers who laid down their professional life to try to tell the public about the high lead in water or the misconduct at these agencies. These courageous, heroic actors were fired. They were fired by these agencies. And what happened to the perpetrators? Of course, they kept their jobs. There was a lawsuit initiated in 2009. Class action was thrown out in 2013. Good luck proving thousands of kids are going to be who was poisoned 6 years after the fact. And 5 kids fought for their day in court. 13 years after the fact, the 5 cases were finally settled just a few days ago. 5 out of 5,000. And CDC's done it again. This is just a week ago. In a tragedy in East Chicago, Indiana, where kids were left in harm's way, very high lead exposures occurred. CDC wrote a falsified report claiming that these kids were not in danger, and that the CDC used flawed or incomplete data and made unfounded or misleading reports. Which brings us to Flint. I knew that another Washington, D.C. was inevitable, and it just happened to come to Flint, Michigan. But this turned out a little bit differently because I'd learned a thing or two in the 6 years that I fought the Washington, D.C. battle. I'm going to share some of that with you, and you'll see why this is definitely beyond the campus. And I'm going to call what happened in Flint a miracle. So again, it started out innocently enough. A change was made in the water treatment plant to use this treatment plant that had been used for 2 weeks every year without any problem, use it for 2 years while a new pipeline was being built. Here's the classic ribbon cutting ceremony, and the mayor and the town council raising their glasses and saying, "Here's to Flint, this is a historic day for us." That proved to be very, very true, not quite for the reasons that they expected. Because a civil servant at the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality forgot to follow federal corrosion control law. And we have this law for a reason. If you do not put your corrosion control chemical in the water, it will eat up your metallic pipes, including your water mains, and it will leach lead into the water at high levels, and it removes the chlorine from the water that stops bacteria from growing. Now, Flint residents very quickly realized that something was very wrong with this new water source. Within just a few weeks after the switch, people started to complain to each other about, "Hey, are you having rashes? Is your hair falling out? Are you getting problems when you go take a bath or shower?" And this is what was appearing on social media at that time. In Flint, people began to realize that taking a bath or shower was a hazardous activity. And the residents were complaining loudly. Here is one of the amazing heroic actors of the Flint story, Leanne Walters, holding up this bottle of orange water. Leanne is a mom who had a living experiment in front of her, 2 twin boys. One of the boys' growth was stunted. He wasn't gaining his weight as fast, he wasn't developing as fast physically or mentally, and she started to ask why. What's going wrong here? These are twins. And she figured out on her own that this child had been lead poisoned, that the source was water. She started to investigate, and she figured out that no corrosion control was being used, that federal law was being broken, and that in addition, the state of Michigan lied to the US EPA and said that they were doing corrosion control when they did not. This mom, Leanne Walters, is an amazing American hero. She figured out all of this on her own. And if you take one thing away from this talk, it is that the most powerful scientific force in the universe is a mother protecting the health of their child. And if you If you mess with that, this mother is going to come and mess you up, and it doesn't matter who you are. They're going to find a way. Now, Leanne, she figured out that it was the water was the source and that her family was henceforth protected. But she fought on and has fought on to this day with no pay, this amazing woman, to protect children in Flint and all around the United States. Now, when she was complaining on this day, she was saying, "This is my water. How can you say it's safe?" Now, we now know that this water sample had hazardous waste levels of lead. So much so that one gulp of that water could cause lead poisoning of her child. One gulp, that's all it would take. And that this water also had high levels of Legionella in it. Now, the residents were complaining, and Leanne, she fought, and she reached out to an amazing US EPA employee. Now, the vast majority of employees at EPA and CDC are incredible, okay? And here's one of them. Mr. Miguel del Toro, April 2015, he heard what's going on. He asked that EPA intervene and exert emergency powers because the residents of Flint were in an imminent substantial endangerment. His EPA did not want to intervene. They wanted to defer to the state. So I was working with Miguel on this. We took samples from Leanne's house, and Miguel and I were kind of plotting because you want to allow these agencies to do their job. I wanted EPA to be the hero here. But the problem is that when you're in these agencies, they do not want to do their job. The one thing that can get you fired at EPA, the most likely thing to get you fired today, is doing your job. Okay, I can cite case after case where that's the case. Now, there's a congressional hearing that proved this fact. I guarantee you, you can watch porn all day on your computer at EPA. They cannot fire you. But you do your job, you're running a big risk. But Miguel, he was at the end of his career, and he said, "I'm not going to let this happen." So he writes this amazing memo up. June, this is many months later. And he makes it clear that the public health is endangered because there's no corrosion control in the city. And we plotted this so EPA would be forced to do their job, that they would be forced to make the state follow federal corrosion control law. That didn't happen. When Miguel wrote this memo, it was released to the press. His boss retaliated against him. He was told by an EPA ethics officer to never again talk to anyone from Flint or about Flint, and this memo was completely covered up by the EPA, and they stood by silently as the state discredited Miguel del Toro. They said he was a rogue employee. He did not speak for the EPA. Miguel was out. So the next day, he writes a memo to his colleagues. "I am really tired of the bad actors being defended, bad actions being ignored, and the people doing the right things being scrutinized. I truly, truly hate working here. EPA is a cesspool." But Miguel's out. So a new employee comes on board, and she's thrown into this, and people are complaining to her about this lead and water issue and how distasteful the water is. Here's her writing to her friends at the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. "Yep, another complaint about our favorite water supply, smiley face. Let me tell you, this Flint situation is really nasty. People are calling me four-letter words over the phone, calling me a crook, but I'm developing a thick skin." And this went on and on for months with EPA looking on, and eventually someone wrote, "You know, I'm not so sure Flint is the community we want to go out on a limb for." And all this time, Flint residents are being told they're marching in the streets. We went and videotaped people being arrested for complaining about their water, the rashes, the crap pouring out of the tap, and they're being told the Flint water is safe to drink. And the mayor of Flint, who had talked to Miguel's boss at EPA and said, "Hey, was that memo anything to worry about?" and was reassured that there's no problem, he goes on TV and tells everyone that he drinks the water and they should too. And people blame Mayor Walling to this day. What happened here is so disgusting that people believe in their heart that it must have been a politician that perpetrated this crime, when in fact, it was career civil servants, the environmental policemen that we pay to protect us, that betrayed the public's trust. And they lied to Mayor Walling, and they lied to everyone who was asking questions about this tragedy. And, at some point you have to give these people credit, because they were so bad, they were good. And what I mean by that, it really takes some nerve. This is the second poorest city in the United States. They're paying the highest water bills in the country. They're actually paying rates 6 times higher than the Netherlands for their water. And we now know that this water was not suitable for anything but flushing toilets. And so they fought, and they fought hard. And they took this issue to the state, and they said, how can you allow this to occur? They held up Miguel's memo. The state laughed at Miss Leanne Walters, the mother of a lead-poisoned child, and they told her, Miguel del Toro has been handled, and no one will be helping you. So when they called me, and they were crying on the phone about this, because we'd been working with them for 5 months, when I hung up, I don't remember much about the next few hours, except my wife tells me I was really, really, really mad. And I believe that. And so we decided we had to break all the rules and intervene and help these folks in Flint, Michigan. So we knew this day had come, and I'd saved up some money in a university account to make this happen. We funded it all by ourselves. We pursued science as a public good. What a concept. And frankly, we had to declare war on our own government agencies and our unethical science industry in this country that supplies drinking water to protect Flint residents. That's what this is. This was a war because any attempt to reason with these people at this point was a waste of time. They were not reasonable people. The only thing that they would understand is ridicule. That's your last weapon, unfortunately. So one of the things we did is we started by allowing the residents to do the job that these agencies refused to do, sample their water and see if it had too much lead in it. We sent out these sample kits August 13th, 2015. The residents did an amazing job. They returned 90% of those kits to us. Just incredible. In the meantime, the state was saying that the residents wouldn't help them sample to see if the water was safe to drink. Just totally lying. We started experiments because we knew we had to reach our beleaguered fourth estate, the media, to help us in this war. So one of the things we did was a test using the current water supply from the Flint River to compare it to the water supply that they had before. It was from Detroit. And we took little pieces of steel and we exposed it to this water. And you can see how the Flint River was eating up that water because it's so corrosive. It's orange because the iron was rusting. So it makes a very simple point that anyone can understand. Hey, you had this water, it was good. Now you have this water, it is bad. These people in Flint are not crazy. So the state fought back and they said, no, Dr. Edwards is wrong. There's no difference in corrosivity of the water. So then we did other tests to show the corrosivity of the water to lead. This is a simple test. You take lead solder, you put it on copper pipe, you put it in the water. Here's where you are today. Here's where you were before. You see that white stuff in the water with Flint? Like a snow globe? That's lead in water. Hazardous waste, levels of lead in water. This is the kind of testing the state should have done before they even made that switch. They refused to do it. So we're like, okay, science is reproducible, right? This took us 4 days to do this test. We'll send these kits to the state of Michigan and allow them to repeat it so that they can see what we saw. We did that and they refused to do the test. So at that point, we had to get really creative and nasty. What we did is enlisted a classroom of fourth graders. And we had them repeat the test, and they saw exactly what we saw, And the local television station came in and videotaped this, and it really made the state look pathetic. They still claimed that there was not a problem, so we went nuclear on them, and we got little brownie troop scientists involved. And this is Dr. Mona's science troop, and we published this on our website, and they wrote letters to the governor as well. And I took those letters and I boxed them up and I sent them to the US EPA in Washington, D.C. And I said, isn't it amazing that little Brownie Scout scientists understand this problem when you folks sitting in Washington, D.C. do not? So this was picked up by the media, and it had a very, very profound effect. The state was in a full crisis mode dealing with us because in a million years, they never expected anyone to help the residents of Flint, Michigan, nor did the EPA. In a million years, they never expected a university to do what we did, and they were probably pretty safe in assuming that. But one of the cool emails I found by FOIA is them talking about us early on and saying, if we're going to take action, it needs to be soon before the Virginia Tech folks scandalize us all. In D.C., it took them 6 years to respond. That's not good. So, unfortunately, it was too late for them by that point because we decided that we were all in for these folks in Flint, Michigan. This was a war. We went up and we stood on the lawn with them, and we said what happened here was just an epically bad decision, and the city's being poisoned. And I'll never forget the reporter when I said that. He's like, "You're Marc Edwards, right? Is this on the record?" And I said, "You better believe it's on the record." And so this is the front page headline the next day. And we started working with a pediatrician in Flint, an amazing woman called Dr. Mona Hanna-Tisha. And she did the analysis that we did in Washington, D.C. She had the blood lead data in Flint and was able to look at it because the state would not give us the blood lead records, and it would have taken us 10 minutes to figure out what was going on. And she had a press conference where she reported her results that in Flint neighborhoods, the incidence of childhood lead poisoning in some neighborhoods had tripled after the water switch. So that was the last domino to fall in this amazing critical mass of moral courage that we created to stop the madness. It was within 6 weeks after we got involved. It was front page in the New York Times. And what they said was impossible. They said they could never, ever again switch back to Detroit water. But after they found out they were poisoning their own kids, they sure did find a way how to do it really, really quickly. And it wasn't long after that that all of America and all the world realized that what happened here was an environmental crime. An environmental crime perpetrated by our government against some of our most vulnerable citizens. And as a society, you are judged by how you treat your most vulnerable. And quite frankly, folks, we don't look very good right now. We don't. And I stand before you because I am ashamed that it is my profession that did this to these innocent folks in Flint, Michigan. I am ashamed. So President Obama, he declared a federal emergency, and of course then it became the cause du jour of all the celebrities. Flint has so much water now. Many of these homes, the greatest danger in these homes, there's so much water being stored. Some of the houses might actually collapse because they're hoarding the water. They're so afraid to use the actual water that's present. FEMA came to town and did blood lead testing on the kids. One of the tragedies is they destroyed the vital infrastructure of the city. The water pipes have been destroyed, and there's actually 100 times the main breaks in Flint of a normal city. This is what a commute now looks like in Flint, Michigan. And so much damage has been done to their infrastructure, Flint residents will never, ever be able to pay for it. It's just a fact. They can't possibly afford to do it. We're going to have to step up and help them. And so I testified to Congress twice on this issue, both in March and January, and I wish I could tell you some good news. I wish I could tell you that the US EPA admitted their responsibility here and said that they're going to get their system fixed so something like Flint doesn't happen again. But unfortunately, what EPA did is they testified under oath that, quote, they had nothing to do with what happened in Flint, Michigan. They testified they didn't know if they could enforce federal law or not. The EPA said they were strong-armed by the state of Michigan. Again, if you don't learn from your mistakes, you will repeat them. And then you ask yourself, okay, my goodness, no one was fired in Washington, D.C., which, by the way, was 30 times worse in terms of the harm done to D.C.'s population than what occurred in Flint, Michigan. 30 times worse. No one was fired there except the engineers and scientists that did their job. And you go, what on earth does it take to get someone fired in this country? I mean, you destroyed a city's vital infrastructure. There's neighborhoods of lead-poisoned children. No one has yet been fired. We now know, too, there was 12 Legionella deaths as well. But then something interesting happened. It got on Comedy Central. All right, now you're really screwing with us because we are an international embarrassment. Yes, that's what it takes to get people fired. So Susan Hedman finally resigned. There's been 8 criminal indictments to date, and there's going to be more of Michigan civil servants. And what we've discovered ever since is that water utilities all around the country are cheating. Flint is not unique. They're unique only to the extent that they got caught. That's the miracle of Flint. And we have so lost our reputation as scientists and engineers in this country that people have never trusted tap water, had less trust in tap water than today. And last year, for the first time, bottled water sales exceeded soda sales in this country because of Flint. So if you want to talk about what's one of the greatest dangers to sustainability, I will tell you point blank what it is. If the public finds us not trustworthy, all is lost. And frankly, too many of the scientists and engineers in this country, academics included, are not deserving of the public trust. We're not. Why should the public listen to us? So, they check back in Congress, by the way. Lead in water is still high, so if you need an explanation of why half our government's insane at any one time, there's your answer, okay? Lead in water. And, lead wasn't even the whole story. I'll just briefly mention the bacteria that were growing in the system because of the lack of corrosion control. We predicted that there would be a Legionella outbreak, and unfortunately there was. And unfortunately, just like lead, the city, county, and state knew about this outbreak and decided not to tell people in Flint because the announcement would inflame the situation. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control knew about these deaths. They knew it was one of the biggest outbreaks in U.S. history. They asked to investigate, and they were told by the state the outbreak is over. Of course, it wasn't. 6 more people died the next year. So that's why you're going to hear about more indictments. And this time, there's probably going to be manslaughter charges involved in this as well. But the silver lining is we got kids protected. As bad as it would have been a lot worse. And when you expose environmental injustice, people from all walks of life step up to get things fixed. The Senate just approved $9 billion, of which $100 million go into Flint. Flint to date has gotten $670 million. That's $67,000 per child in relief, partly in response to us exposing this problem. So I was asked to talk about overcoming barriers. What are the barriers to doing this work? Why don't more professors do it? Okay, here's some simple math for you. It costs money. The work I did in D.C. cost me $1.2 million out of my own pocket. I don't have $1.2 million. Okay? I did get $400,000 from the MacArthur Foundation. The work in Flint, that cost $300,000. We did get $300,000 back from GoFundMe. But one of the reasons you don't see more professors doing this is no one can afford it. I can't afford it either. But I could not afford not to do it. So another huge factor is cowardice. I look at my tenured faculty, colleagues around the country, I will look them in the eye, and I will call them the greatest generation of cowards this world has ever seen. And why is that? Because we are not about serving the public. Okay, we have a perverse incentive structure in academia in this country. Anyone who's in it knows it exists. What do we value? We value funding, papers, and citations. At the end of the day, that's what counts, okay? And that makes us cowards because we don't want to lose our precious research funding. So yeah, there's retaliation. Okay, I lost funding from these agencies. They personally attacked me over the years. Believe me, I'm not going to get another grant from CDC or EPA. You can guarantee that right now. But you know what hurt even worse is I lost 80% of the friends that I had when I started on this journey. I lost my funding network. And there's a general lack of support from academia itself. Now I'm calling this out here today because I kid you not, one of the most prestigious journals in my field wrote an editorial last week criticizing me for my work in Flint, Michigan. What we did in Flint, Michigan. This is Environmental Science and Technology, who claims that speaking out against a corrupt or incompetent system is because people want to create a narrative that's a Hollywood drama. And if academics ever become allies of a particular cause, no matter how just, we jeopardize the social contract that underpins the tradition of financial support for research. And because, I'm not making this up, because our funding is too precious to lose, we should avoid this because it exposes our community to potential retaliation in the form of budget cuts. What's the solution? This is the oldest academic dilemma in the book, isn't it? His solution? We should teach our students to do a better job pushing back when they're faced with injustice. So we tenured faculty, we can't do it, and we got to teach our students to lay down their professional lives? Is that not the very definition of cowardice? So I asked him, I said, did we meet the last resort criteria that you put forward to go into Flint? He responded, from everything I've been able to learn, it looks like a criminal activity, and as a citizen, I'm glad someone did it. I just don't think it should have been an academic. I'll be responding to this editorial tomorrow. So you check our website. This editorial is the best condemnation, self-inflicted, unintentional I've ever seen of modern academic culture. And then it takes time, okay? This battle is 12 years. 25 hours a week I spent on this. And it has not been easy, I will tell you that much. I met some really amazing people on this journey. This is some of them from Flint, Michigan, by the way. So Leanne, Miguel, Dr. Mona, and myself. And, you know, it was just, I just wish everyone in this room could experience something like this and that we did in Flint once in their life, where people just put it all on the line to help someone less fortunate than yourself. There was nothing in it for us. We had a renounced Catholic, a Republican, a communist, and a socialist. And let me tell you, it never was an issue, folks. Because, you know, we were fighting for the common morality, and I will take this to my grave. Flint, Michigan was exactly the kind of community that we should have gone out on a limb for, and I'm glad we did it. So with that, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Wow. Okay, over here. Wow. Wow, Mark, we really, really appreciate your tenacity. We're really glad you were able to do something about this. One thing that you mentioned in your presentation that kind of gripped me was through all of that, the comment that came out that no one was hurt. Okay, no one was hurt. But I think those 4 words are the catalyst that moves us forward now. Because we know by not paying attention to sustainability, by not doing due diligence to keep the world better and prevent things like Flint from happening, people will get hurt. We don't want another no one was hurt moment, right? How about a big hand? You all with me? Okay, yeah. Okay, meanwhile, this was a great way to kick off this year's conference. Now I want to invite you all to join us in the expo hall for an opening reception with light hors d'oeuvres, and the exhibitors are ready to share some details with you on their innovative products and services. Meanwhile, Dr. Edwards will be available to take questions after we adjourn from here if you all are interested out in the exhibit hall. All right, thank you all. It's been a pleasure.